Ever wonder why your automated license assignments sometimes vanish into thin air even though your group rules seem perfect? You're not alone, and there's a hidden trap in dynamic groups that most admins overlook. If you've ever spent hours troubleshooting licensing failures, stick around. Today we're breaking down the invisible reasons your licensing automations suddenly go sideways and how to catch problems before they impact your users. Why your license assignments break when you least expect it. If you've ever changed a user's department or job title and then weeks later wondered why their email stopped working, you're far from alone. It's one of those hidden admin headaches, a perfectly routine update in Azure AD, and suddenly a license that should be assigned or removed is in the wind. Most of us build these dynamic groups in the first place because, let's face it, manual license management is chaos. Group-based licensing feels like it should solve everything with simple rules tied to things like department or location. You design your group, set a filter, and expect smooth sailing from there. That's the promise, but actually there's a trap hidden in the logic. Picture this. Someone moves from sales to marketing and you update their attributes in the source directory. Feels low-key, barely worth thinking about. But what you don't see is that Azure AD uses those field values to decide who belongs where, change the attribute, and the user can silently drop out of a group. If that group controls a Microsoft 365 license, they could lose email, OneDrive, or Teams access without anyone hearing a peep. Or the opposite, they hang onto an expensive license because the system didn't quite process the change, or a conditional rule didn't include their new value. If the automation doesn't pick up every detail, users slip through, and that's where the invisible failure starts stacking up. Ask around, and most admins will tell you a similar story. There's the classic scenario where HR renames a department. Suddenly, users are floating outside the licensing groups you spent months designing. Nobody notices until someone tries to book a meeting and gets rejected by Outlook, or finance stares in disbelief at a bill full of unused premium licenses. It all looks like everything's working until someone needs something. And then you're off chasing logs and support tickets, wishing there had been a heads up before things went sideways. One admin I know was doing nothing more dramatic than updating a division field. It should have taken a minute. Instead, a critical user lost their license to a line of business app, and it was days before anyone put the pieces together. The audit trail showed a smooth change: attribute updated, group membership recalculated, license removed, just like you'd expect. Except nobody thought to check if that business app was tied to an old department field value. That's the problem. These connections are invisible until something breaks. The technical process makes sense, but it's quietly dependent on staying in sync with ever-changing real-world data. Behind the curtain, what's really happening is that group membership is all about Azure AD attributes. Every time you assign a rule, say anyone in department equals sales, you're betting that the field will always be set and always match the logic you wrote months ago. The reality is, department names change, locations consolidate, and hybrid work means users don't fit neatly into checkboxes anymore. When the group's logic gets out of sync with what's actually happening in the business, licenses disappear or stick around far longer than they should. You usually don't feel it until you're chasing a missing permission, or worse, trying to explain a licensing bill that just spiked for no clear reason. Research backs this up. Recent industry surveys show that over 60% of organizations have experienced unexpected licensing mismatches, and more often than not, the root cause is overlooked dynamic group rule logic. In a world where the user lifecycle is getting more dynamic, it's not surprising that these rules fail silently rather than causing obvious errors. No pop-up or bright red warning tells you a user just fell through the cracks. Users usually don't report issues with services they never had access to. They just work around them or ping support when something critical fails. Meanwhile, finance teams only see the impact months later when a fresh round of license renewals brings surprise overages. Here's where things get risky. If you're not watching the link between directory attributes, group memberships, and license assignments, you risk user downtime and licensing overages creeping up on you. Every disconnected attribute is another chance for an invisible failure to stall productivity or slip through unnoticed until the cost lands on your budget. I've worked with organizations that learned this the hard way. Unmonitored changes led to entire departments stranded without access after a reorg, or payroll analysts inexplicably racking up high-end licenses for tools they never touched. The simple truth is, most organizations break their license assignments all the time without realizing it's because a field like division or cost center changed and nobody double-checked the group rules. It's not bad automation, it's automation built on shifting data. And most admins don't have time to babysit the connections every day. The good news is you can build smarter group logic and set up checks to catch these slip ups early. There are approaches that make dynamic licensing what it was promised to be, predictable and invisible in the right way. And that's exactly what we'll break down next. How to build group rules that actually hold up and spot failures before your users or your finance team get the surprise. The anatomy of dynamic rules, building smarter, not just faster. Ever notice how a group rule that made perfect sense with 100 users suddenly turns into a minefield once the org stretches to 1,000? You start with something clean and obvious. Everyone in marketing gets a standard M365 license. The logic clicks, nobody questions it. Fast forward a few months, new regions come aboard, departments get split, special projects pop up, and suddenly the clean rule book gets buried under a pile of new exceptions and tweaks. Now you're staring at a dynamic group membership formula that looks more like a college-level logic puzzle than a practical admin tool. Let's walk through how these rules actually work. Under the hood, it's all about user attributes, those fields in Azure AD like department, country, title, or even custom entries your HR system feeds in. The system watches these values constantly, and your rules basically say, if someone meets these conditions, put them in this group. It saves hours, sometimes days, in manual assignment, no question. What gets interesting is how you mix and match those properties to get the targeting right. The moment you want to be more specific, like granting a license strictly to US-based sales staff, you start stacking conditions. Department equals sales and country equals USA. Feels airtight at first glance, but when you kick the tires, the edge cases start piling up. Someone's country field is never filled out, or their department was updated to North America sales by a well-meaning HR admin. Suddenly, your bulletproof group has holes. You've got users floating in between, not matching any rule and therefore missing the licenses they need. It can be even sneakier the other way. A misspelled or incomplete country field leaves staff from a newly launched branch holding onto the wrong set of tools. If you factor in contractors, consultants, and employees shifting job roles, the potential for drift only grows. Now, add in custom attributes. Extension properties sound like a great way to capture specifics about your users, but unless you enforce standards, they become a wild west. One admin uses division marketing, another types MKTG, a third skips it for new hires. Azure AD isn't going to guess what you meant. It will just quietly include or exclude users in your groups. Microsoft actually points out these issues, cautioning against relying too heavily on custom fields or properties that aren't reliably populated. In large orgs, syncing data across multiple systems only adds more room for mix-ups. It isn't just about keeping spelling in check. Every time a field is blank, mistyped, or used differently by separate teams, you get invisible gaps in group membership. Over time, these build into bigger headaches, people without the right licenses or just as often consuming costly licenses they shouldn't have. Comparing a basic rule to a truly robust one brings this to life. With a simple rule, say department equals sales, you're exposed to any shift in naming, any missed entry. Sales gets renamed to global sales, and your logic immediately breaks down. A well thought out dynamic rule, on the other hand, bakes in protection. You add OR conditions to allow for variance, presence checks to skip blanks, maybe even a fallback condition that includes certain job titles as a backup. Instead of a single fragile checkbox, you have a flexible net. For example, department equals sales or department equals global sales and country is not blank. The moment a department name shifts or an attribute is missed, you still catch the right people, or at least identify who's fallen out fast. Before you start building complex group rules, it pays to map out which attributes actually drive business processes and which ones are just convenient labels. If your rule uses department, country, and title, you need to know every place in the business where those values get updated and who controls the source of truth. Is it HR, is it IT, or a random script somewhere in the joiner, mover, lever process? This mapping isn't busywork, it's operational insurance. Without it, accounts start leaking from your logic every time business changes or someone skips a field in onboarding. Some organizations now set up regular review cycles, quarterly audits to catch slow drift before it turns into a crisis. At the end of the day, Scaling dynamic group rules without a plan lands most admins in a tough spot. The reality is mixing multiple attributes together saves time at first, but unless you map out dependencies and standardized values, your automation is just as brittle as any manual process. When the org changes, which it always does, your rules need to flex with it, not crack under the pressure. Smart rules are built with both precision and resilience in mind. Think layered logic, validation, and regular reviews, not shortcuts. Now that we've torn apart why group-based automation gets messy, let's look at what it takes to actually catch and fix those invisible errors before the whole thing falls apart. Finding ghost licenses and plugging costly leaks. How many people in your tenant are quietly stacking up unnecessary license costs, or even worse, missing the apps they need while nobody knows about it? If group rules handled everything perfectly, this wouldn't be a thing. But what actually happens is admin teams end up with a shadow inventory of what you could call ghost licenses. Those are the licenses assigned to users who, by all logic, shouldn't have them or should have lost them months ago. It's the opposite of clean. These silent errors multiply over time, soaking up your budget and tipping off problems only when someone in finance finally asks, why are we paying for 50 extra project licenses? Yeah, let's break down how these silent slip-ups get in. A user's department changes, or maybe a country field never gets updated, so they never get dropped from a group that assigns a premium license. They move to a new team, but the group logic in Azure AD doesn't fully reflect that shift. It doesn't help that dynamic group rules aren't always fast or comprehensive about processing attribute changes. Sometimes updates lag behind reality by days or weeks. Over time, people collect access they don't need or get pruned from the wrong places. You end up with floating teams or users circling outside the intended license pools, and hardly anyone reports it because unless you lose access to something critical, it's easy to miss. Here's the real pain. These ghost licenses aren't even visible through routine checks. Microsoft's group overview makes it look like everything matches your design, but a closer look inside the Microsoft 365 Admin Center often tells a different story. Running the standard license assignment report can show you users with E5 licenses who, by role, should only have E3. Or people in the contractors group quietly consuming Power BI Pro for months because the original group rule was tied to a team field that's not even used anymore. The Admin Center reports surface some of these outliers. You'll spot accounts with licenses that don't match their business title, or just as often staff missing required licensing, even though on paper their group membership says otherwise. I worked with a client last year who learned this the hard way. Their contractor pool swelled after a major project launch. Nobody reviewed the group rules when the project wrapped up. The HR system quietly flagged the contractors as inactive, but the old team attribute stayed put. For the entire quarter, 24 outside consultants kept their premium licenses. None of them needed access anymore, but nobody cleaned up the group criteria or checked the assigned licenses by hand. By the time someone caught it, the overage was enough to cause a panicked meeting with finance. It isn't rare, it's just quietly expensive. There's a reason it slips through. The native reports only get you so far. Group membership and license assignments live in different places. The admin center's built-in tools let you filter by group and see who has what, but they can't show you where gaps or ghost assignments exist outside your original logic. This is where a lot of admins start combining built-in reporting with PowerShell just to build a list of who's actually got which license versus who's supposed to have them. It only takes one good PowerShell script for the whole thing to snap into focus. If you've ever used the get msol user all where bars licenses dot account SKU ID EQ tenant Power BI Pro command, you know the feeling. You run it and suddenly spot dev team interns with licenses you swore were locked to full-time staff. That aha moment is pretty common. The first time you export all users with a given license group by job title or compare against an HR export, you almost always find something off. Licenses sitting with temp staff, unlicensed folks in busy departments, or whole business units with the wrong SKU. This is your cue to do a little reconciliation, go group by group, pull actual usage data, and see who needs what. That might mean plugging unlicensed users back into a group, or just as commonly, slicing expensive stuff off anyone outside your real business requirement. The process looks tedious, but when it runs smooth, you free up budget almost instantly. Each unused or misplaced license you recover goes straight to your bottom line, or at the very least, keeps audit headaches away. The big win here is catching these ghosts before they turn into real spend or productivity issues. By combining what you learn from admin center reports with targeted PowerShell checks, you start to see patterns. Which team attributes are reliable drivers, where your real leaks live, and why certain user types keep snagging the wrong SKUs. Instead of waiting for finance or a frustrated user to bring it to your attention, you stay a step ahead, patching group logic, closing loopholes, and putting the spend where it truly matters. It feels good when you see your license count finally match your org chart, but staying there as the company changes. That's the real challenge most teams face next. Because as group rules keep shifting and business data evolves, the battle against ghost licenses is never really finished. That's where future proofing comes in, building processes that bend with your org rather than snap each time the business grows or reshuffles. Future-proofing license automation, adapting to change without chaos. Anyone who's ever watched an org chart shift in real time knows exactly how small changes ripple through license assignments. If your structure is even a little dynamic, you've probably seen it firsthand. A reorg comes through, departments get renamed, or a region spins up a new team, and the underlying group rules immediately start showing cracks. Group-based licensing can handle a lot, but the moment your rules rely on patched together static values or hard-coded department names, you're setting yourself up for pain the next time an org change hits. The logic you wrote for a world with Marketing North America as a constant, that's now one rename away from going obsolete. Static rules aren't always obvious at first. They creep in when you create group membership filters with exact matches. Department equals research, or country equals UK. Feels correct when you're building it because everyone just uses those fields as you intend. But as soon as your organization expands into a new territory, adds job codes, or kicks off a merger, those hard-coded values fast become brittle. You wind up with people left dangling outside license groups, missing access to basic apps, or worse, still clinging to premium tools despite changing roles months ago. Every new department or location increases the chance someone falls into the gray area between old rules and new structure. One of the clearest examples I've seen was when a mid-sized tech company launched a new product division. The right people were hired, they got AD profiles, but nobody updated the dynamic group logic that controlled premium licenses. The original rule targeted department equals engineering, missing the new product innovation label. Over 3 months, new hires worked without the project management tools they needed, while compliance started getting nervous about access. No one thought to review the group logic because on paper, licensing was supposed to be automatic. Eventually, IT found the disconnect after a support ticket made it clear the automation had never included that new team. The fix only took minutes, but the cost in productivity and audit anxiety stuck around much longer. You can't prevent your business from changing, but you can design your logic to handle it. Instead of pinning everything on static values, start using advanced rule features. Using contains instead of equals on a department field makes your groups adapt to new department names with a shared prefix. If engineering grows into Engineering North America and Engineering APAC, your dynamic group still picks them up, no manual tweaks required. Wildcards are your friend here. They let your rules sweep in new values before someone's left out in the cold. Nested group membership is worth a look as well. Build core groups for broad license assignments, then slot in smaller exception groups for departments with unique needs, giving you a net that's both wide and targeted. It's not enough to build smart rules once. Documentation turns into a lifeline every time the org starts reworking teams or importing data from a new system. Maintaining a living spreadsheet with every group rule, what attributes it relies on, and who owns that field makes post-merger integration and annual audits 100 times less messy. Regular audits quarterly at minimum mean you're checking actual group membership against the intended business structure. If HR starts naming departments differently, or a new management tool feeds extra data into Azure AD, you'll spot drift before it becomes widespread. Another game changer is synchronization with your HR or source of truth systems. When Azure AD gets its core attributes fed directly from HR, you skip all the in-between updates and ensure user properties stay true to what's happening in the business. The moment someone moves teams, their profiles and underlying groups align. This sounds basic, but a lot of organizations still handkey changes in multiple platforms. So bad data lingers and rules break quietly. Syncing cuts off that risk at the source. When HR signals a change, Azure AD Group logic reflects it. No more guesswork, fewer missed updates, and a much tighter grip on who should have what license. All of this works best if you keep eyes on the system, not just the data. Configuring alerts or at least scheduled reports makes it possible to catch group rule failures early. Teams like to push silent updates to meta fields or even change core attribute formats without announcing it. A weekly report that tells you which users lost or gained licenses outside the normal joiner, mover, leaver cycle gives you a way to spot blips and investigate before an outage or licensing spike. The earlier you catch those patterns, the fewer surprise support tickets and surprise bills you face. Getting dynamic license assignment right is less about building the perfect rule today and more about setting up your automations to bend without breaking. The key payoff: when new offices open, projects spin up, or teams reorganize, your licensing logic flexes with minimal effort. You keep users productive, control costs, and avoid compliance headaches, all while letting business move at its own pace. What ends up mattering most isn't just how you set up today's rules, but how easily you can adapt when next quarter's org chart looks nothing like this quarter's. And as tempting as it is to set and forget your automation, the smartest move is staying proactive. Because when the business shifts, the only thing worse than a missed license is not knowing it happened until months down the road. It's easy to think of license management as a technical chore, but missed group rules turn into business risks faster than most admins expect. The problems don't shout. They creep in quietly, hiding behind attribute drift, rule mismatches, and forgotten exceptions. When dynamic groups actually match reality, you're not just saving on budget, you're protecting the trust users and finance have in IT. So carve out some time this week for a real audit, see which rules hold up and which ones quietly failed. And if you want more tips that Microsoft's docs never cover, hit subscribe and stick around.